is getting it wrong. My view.
Just to stick with our two examples of Trump and Musk, they obviously cannot, they're not detached from reality. I think one would say that they see potential realities and realize them against people who say that they're delusional. And so does that, I mean, how do you make sense of that? I mean, does that sort of confuse who's the real narcissist? In other words, are the people were the people that were actually in denial of reality were the ones who told Musk and Trump that they could never create a low orbit satellite system or become president a second time.
Yeah, well, I misled you a bit, and my apologies for that. When I say in touch with reality, I meant the elements of reality, in reality, that could challenge the self-concept. It is the self-concept that is divorced from reality, because the self-concept is godlike, divine, perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, brilliant, genius, and so on. So there is this self-concept. Evidently, it's counterfactual. It will not, if it is exposed to countervailing information, it will collapse. It will crumble. It's very fragile structure, very vulnerable. That's why today we distinguish between overt narcissist and vulnerable or fragile narcissist, covert narcissist. So it's a very fragile structure and so on. So when I said not in touch with reality, I didn't mean someone who can't do shopping or go shopping, or someone who doesn't know how to fly to Shanghai. Yeah, it's not this kind of reality. In other words, we make a distinction between episodic and semantic. Semantic is how to skill acquisition. So narcissists are very skilled. Many of them are, scientists and chief executive officers and maybe presidents and so on. They're very skilled. The elements in reality that stand the chance of challenging or undermining or reframing the inflated, fantastic self-concept are the ones ignored, are the ones denied, are
Mm.
the ones repressed. And in this sense, the reality testing is impaired, it's compromised. When the narcissist is forced to confront these elements in reality, for example, I think I'm a genius. And then someone with authority, I don't know, Albert Einstein, his ghost, his spirit, would tell me, "You're not a genius, you're an idiot." It's a problem because it would challenge my self-concept as a genius, and it would create a collapse. That's a clinical term, by the way. Narcissistic collapse. I would get in touch with shame and other negative emotions that gave rise to this counterfactual concoction or piece of fiction. And then I would revert to a borderline state and essentially become suicidal and depressive and whatever. So the price, the cost of getting in touch with data or stimuli or information from reality that could even potentially, however remotely, undermine the self-concept, the cost is so enormous that narcissists are what we call hypervigilant. They are constantly on the alert, constantly scanning the environment for threats and slights and insults and challenges and criticism and disagreements and so on. And they become very aggressive and very defensive when they come across what they interpret to be any of these things.
Mm.
So this is called hypervigilance. And so now we have a concept of the locus of grandiosity. Imagine that I'm a narcissist and the locus of grandiosity is that I'm a genius. Okay, that's my locus of grandiosity. But I don't think I'm a great athlete recently, as far as I know. I'm not a great athlete. Yeah, I'm not a great basketball player or whatever. So if you were to tell me, um, Sam, you're flabby and you're obese, and it will have zero impact on me. It is not part of my self-concept. It is not the locus of my grandiosity. But if you were to tell me, Sam, I've talked to the biggest minds on earth and I've interviewed, the greatest, and you're not among them. You're not exactly a genius. You're derivative. That's a challenge to my self-concept. That is the kind of thing that I would fend off, isolate, repress, bury, reframe you. I would say, this guy is an idiot. He's incapable of appreciating my mind and so on.
Mm.
So I would have multiple defenses. I would also become very aggressive. I would attack you. I would devalue you. I would push you away. I would smear campaign you. So when you look at someone like Donald Trump, and I think to the best of my knowledge, I try to check, I was the first to suggest in March 2016, to the best of my knowledge, in writing, I mean, the first to suggest that Donald Trump may have a narcissistic personality disorder. March 2016, in American Thinker, of all places. It's a conservative outlet. I gave an interview to American Thinker, and I said, I think this guy has narcissistic personality disorder. They asked me more or less the same questions, and I explained. And I said he's very sensitive to criticism and disagreement. He's this, he's that. I explained what is hypervigilance, the protective firewall, or the attempt to isolate the self-concept from any impinging or breaching information from the environment, and so on. These are all classical defenses of the narcissist. In the case of Musk, there is megalomania, simply. What used to be called megalomania is today the new name is narcissistic personality disorder. The man is a megalomaniac. Now, I mentioned before that narcissistic personality disorder is a positive adaptation in entrepreneurship for two reasons. You overvalue your capacity and you charge ahead, and you undervalue or underestimate risk. We know that people with narcissism underestimate risk. They are also very bad at predicting the consequences of their actions. They also have a sense of immunity and impunity. So all these, if you put them together, they're great when you have a startup. You need to exaggerate the importance of a startup and its impact on the world. You then need to charge ahead as if you are possessed of all the necessary knowledge and skills and what have you, which is never right, never correct. And then you have to underestimate the risks. And these are good things when you're an entrepreneur. And of course, his megalomania is so extreme. He's going to save the human species and what have you, that, of course, he also ended up being the richest man on earth. There's a proportionality between how deluded you are and how successful you are as an entrepreneur.
Sam, do you think that Trump derangement syndrome is partly explained by covert narcissists being triggered by overt narcissists or grandiose narcissists?
Narcissism is an organizing principle of modern civilization. It is a hermeneutic principle as well. It has explanatory power. If you want to make sense of your life, of specific sectors of the economy, of behaviors of politicians, narcissism comes handy. It's a great tool, you know. So it's an organizing and hermeneutic principle. It means that it infiltrates and permeates the left, the right, all ideologies and all human intercourse, all human discourse, all interactions, all types of relationships, interpersonal or not, political or not, etc. It's useless, therefore, to say the right is narcissistic, the left is not, the left is narcissistic, the right is not. There are different expressions, different manifestations, the same way a gene can express itself one way or another. But of course, narcissism on the right would have very little to do with narcissism on the left. Narcissism on the left would probably be victimhood oriented. Whereas narcissism on the right would be power oriented or exclusion oriented. So narcissism could have different, settings, and it's a very versatile and very malleable and flexible thing. It's like water; it goes wherever. And yes, of course, an overt narcissist would definitely trigger massively covert narcissists. We have this online. You have forums of people who self-designate as empaths. There's no such thing as empath. It's a completely nonsensical invention. There's no trace of it in clinical literature or anywhere. These empaths are actually, in my view, covert narcissists who have been victimized and triggered by overt, grandiose narcissists, like Donald Trump. So on the left, the progressive left, the woke movement, and I have many, many videos severely criticizing the woke movement and all victimhood movements. So on this, I think we're on the same page, I believe. I don't know. But now, on the left is infused with and infested with narcissism, of course. And again, the guise is victimhood, because victimhood is pro-social. Victimhood
Mm.
also affords you with enormous leverage, because if you're a victim, you have rights that confer obligations on others automatically. Like
Mm.
just by virtue of being a victim, you're endowed with rights, and other people must oblige. And if they don't, they're bullies, they're thugs, they're abusers, they're. So it's a great tool for not only social control, but extracting individual benefits and collective
Mm.
benefits. It's, in other words, a social control and manipulative tool. Louis Althusser, who used to be a neo-Marxist philosopher, and ended up in a mental asylum like the best of them, Nietzsche and so on. So Louis Althusser called it interpellation. So interpellation is when society or a group in society instruct you on how to be. They define your identity, construct your identity, actually. And it led later to deconstructivism and so on. But he was the first to suggest this. The society sends you messages, some of them implicit, some of them explicit, and so on. And the totality of these messages shapes who you are, constructs you, like so many Lego bricks. And so this is interpellation. The left interpellates people by actually conveying a victimhood message.
Mm.
And by conveying a victimhood message, it constructs its own adherents. You're a victim, but it also constructs the recipients of the message. Because when I get a victimhood message, I have two choices. If I decline the message, if I refuse the message, I'm automatically an abuser. And if I accept the message, I become submissive. I'm interpellated. I'm instructed how to act. I
Mm.
don't have freedom of choice anymore. So it's a highly totalitarian message,
Mm.
highly authoritarian message, ironically. You know. But the right is not exempt. Not at all. Don't misunderstand me. And
But
uh,
would you simplify it to say that the narcissism on the right tends to be more grandiose and the narcissism on the left tends to be more covert?
there's victimhood in both spaces. Like white supremacism is a victimhood movement, in effect.
Hmm.
There's victimhood in both spaces, but the way victimhood is construed is different. Whereas in the left, the victimhood is extortionate. It's extortion-based victimhood. I'm a
Mm.
victim, you owe me.
Mm.
And you owe me, you will give me. And if you don't give me, I'll penalize you. And one way to penalize you is to cast you as an abuser, to defame you, to take away your reputation. There's a reputational cost when you
Mm.
don't conform to the narrative on the left.
Mm.
On the right, the victimhood gives rise to an operational agenda. It's a very functional kind of victim. It's like I'm a victim, but I'm going to do something about it.
Mm.
I'm not imposing anything on anyone. I'm not expecting anything from. I'm going to storm the Capitol or whatever. I'm going to take things into my hands. I'm going to
Mm.
because I think the right is connected umbilically connected to the early individualism in in the West, in the Wild West, and so on. This kind of
Mm.
whereas the left is European.
Mm.
The left is a foreign transplant. The left in the United States, I'm talking, because in Europe it's indigenous. In Europe, the left sits well with. I think in Europe, the right is a foreign transplant
Mm.
in some ways, because the modern right is not exactly Nazism. Everyone conflates the modern right with Nazism. Nazism was not. I We could have another conversation. I'm not sure Nazism was a right-wing movement, but okay.
Mm.
Uh, the new modern right in Europe is imported, and the modern left in America is imported,
Mm.
and they're both xenotransplantation. They're both foreign to the body. There's an immune response in both cases.
Mm.
And so in America, the left is European. European values, European teachings, European teachers, European gurus, I mean, you name it. I mean, just look at the curricula in universities, which I had the opportunity to do. I'm now a professor in the Commonwealth Institute in Cambridge.
mm,
So I received curricula to teach and so on and so forth. Even the United Kingdom is infected.
mm,
The on the curriculum you have majority, I would say, French thinkers.
mm,
In Britain, French thinkers, not 18th century, for example, Adam Smith or Hume or no. You have Aron, and you have Althusser, and you have so whereas the left, I always knew that the left has no way to survive in America. It's
mm,
alien to America.
mm,
It's not it's un-American, not in the bad sense, not traitorous, but it's not American.
mm,
Right is much more American. Like do something about it. And so the victimhood in the right is motivational, to cut a long
mm,
story short, is motivational, and the victimhood on the left is attitudinal.
mm,
And that's quite a gigantic difference, mind you.
mm,
Victimhood on the left is passive. The victimhood on the left is active.
mm,
They're both victimhood movements, but very different. Anyhow, coming back to your question, it was a long detour. Yes, I think Donald Trump triggers and provokes the narcissists on the left. Absolutely. Many of them are not covert even. I'm not sure all of them are covert.
mm,
Narcissists trigger narcissists because they
mm,
have competing claims for grandiosity, and usually they compete for the same space.
mm,
So if I go to an academic conference, I consider myself a genius. Anyone else there would claim to be a genius, I would become an instant competitor. I'd become hostile and aggressive. I would try to shoot them down, take them down, you name it. Narcissists don't sit well with each other.
mm,
So what you call Trump Derangement Syndrome might well be narcissistic injury. That's a clinical term. Might well be a kind of reaction by narcissists when they are exposed to other narcissists with identical claims for the same space of meaning. The same. So I fully believe that Trump succeeds, and I think pretty deliberately, by the way. I think he's playing with them, he's toying with them, in my view.
mhm,
He knows damn well I think he's triggering them on purpose. I think many of his practical jokes and crazy pronouncements and promulgations, they are absolutely intended to provoke the narcissists on the left. And they succeed.
mhm,
They are, because narcissists are not intelligent. They are reactive. They're binary machines.
mm,
So they're not really, there's no sophistication there. If you trigger them, they react.
mhm.
And so it's very easy to trigger them. All he has to do is say, I'm the king. I'm a king, and then sit back and enjoy the show. And they give it to him. They stupidly give it to him. That's how I see it.
It seems like that was the whole strategy from the beginning, is Trump said that Obama, he implied that Obama did not have a birth certificate, was not born in the United States. That seemed to trigger the narcissistic identification between progressives and Obama. And then he said that the immigrants coming here, who the left had viewed as victims, were in fact predators. And then he allowed the hostility and aggression from the left. And really, you go all the way, to last year's elections, where I think a lot of people voted for Trump because they were so frightened of
Yeah.
what the left was doing.
Narcissists cannot refrain from reacting. It's an impulse. Narcissists, in this sense, are impulsive. They are not. There's no impulse control. They cannot. You cannot say, for example, to a narcissist, "I'm a king," and expect the narcissist to say, "Okay, what an idiot." I mean, we're going to react. No,
Mm,
they have to go. They go online, they write articles and op-eds, and they
mm,
analyze the statement, and this is a threat to democracy. And he knows how to push the buttons. He
mm,
pushes the buttons expertly. He's amazing. And the only reason he's so good is a narcissist. I,
mm,
as a narcissist, know exactly how to trigger another narcissist. I do it expertly. If you are
mm,
not a narcissist, you'll never reach my level.
mm,
Because it's intimate knowledge. I've lived with it I know how others push my buttons. So I know what to do to others. Mind you, that is not to imply that Donald Trump's statements are, there's veracity there, that is adheres to facts, that is truthful. I'm not saying any of this. Narcissists are not truthful. They are, and so on. So
mm,
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying
mm,
that it's simply two groups of narcissists fighting it out, duking it out. With
mm,
the movie we're watching, is a competition between two groups of narcissists over a limited space, basically, which is it happens to be the United States. And who will prevail? We don't know. Narcissists are great at constructing cults, cult following. There is something called collective narcissism.
Mm.
There is a mob mind or a hive mind or a cult mind. Cult mind is a clinical term. So we have this where people disappear into the collective, suspend their judgment, their reality testing, relegate internal functions, we call them ego functions, relegate them to an outsider. The borderline has a cult with her intimate partner. She outsources her internal
Mm.
regulation to the intimate partner. She gives the intimate partner complete control over her over emotions, over her labile moods,
Mm.
over her experience of reality. And that's a cult of two,
Mm.
one leader and one follower. The same dynamic, exactly the same dynamic occurs between the narcissistic leader and the tens of millions who follow him.
Mm.
So it's the same dynamic. It's a suspension of things, suspension of judgment, of reality, and so on.
And Sam, when you and I first spoke, which was now probably almost 3 years ago, I was asking for you to help me
You got
understand.
younger. I don't know how you did this. You got younger. It's
Oh, you
shocking.
do too. You do too. I think it's our haircuts. You get the
Yeah.
haircut shorter.
Yeah.
Um, there were climate activists throwing soup on paintings, and shutting down traffic and crying on camera and describing how the world that they were given is fallen. Now we don't see after Trump's election. He's pulled the United States out of the Paris climate agreements. He's ended many of the climate green investments. He's expanded oil and gas production, and yet we don't have climate change protests. Instead, we have protests of Teslas. And Greta Thunberg has moved on from climate change to activism on Palestine. Are those signs that really there wasn't a core commitment there to addressing climate change and that it was really about, narcissists expressing or seeking to gain attention, just using whatever was in the news at the time?
Listen, you're so good at this. I have no idea why you're interviewing me. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
on the part of these people, yes. However, scientists, for example, who have dedicated their careers to climate change and so on, they have vested interests, obviously. But on the other hand, many of them are truly committed to the issue. They really are exercised by the issue. They feel strongly about the issue. They delve into the issue and so on and so forth. The honest ones among them change their minds from time to time and so on, but
Mm.
the core topic remains. And these are the only dedicated people. The others, like Thunberg and worse, they're itinerant narcissists in search of self-aggrandizing causes. And what determines their commitment is the exposure.
Hmm.
Climate change afforded exposure, then it didn't. Palestine afforded exposure, and soon it won't. They will move on to the next thing. God knows
Hmm.
what. These are professional activists. These are victimhood. These are victimhood professionals.
Hmm.
This is a name. It's called competitive victimhood or professional victimhood. It was first described ironically by Israelis. Uh, there was a there was four studies by Gabay, Gabay, and her allies, her colleagues. Four studies published in, I think all of them were published simultaneously in the year 2000 and 2020. I'm sorry, 2020. And she described a mental state of victimhood, a personality that seeks victimhood in order to self-regulate. And then she described this personality and she said these people uh, would go looking for situations where they could consider themselves to be victims, would ostentatiously display their victimhood, would manipulate other people using their alleged victimhood, would insist would be entitled, would feel entitled, What she didn't realize, Gabai, it's a she, what she didn't realize is that when I finished reading the paper, it was an excellent description of narcissism. Narcissists are self-aggrandizing, they're entitled, they feel victims, all the time they claim to be victims, victimhood mental or stance, and so on. She was describing a narcissist. And then there were studies in British Columbia and in China, and Taiwan, and other places, and so on. And today it is widely accepted that there is such a thing, victimhood construct, victimhood personality.
Mm,
And these people uh, leverage victimhood or use victimhood as a vehicle to regulate themselves internally because they are narcissists.
mm,
And so there were studies that have demonstrated pretty conclusively that narcissists and psychopaths have penetrated the upper echelons of most major victimhood movements. And they now are in control of these victimhood movements, narcissists and psychopaths. So, yes, Greta was not committed to any specific cause. It afforded her the exposure. It was great. And then, it dwindled. There was a far right and right backlash.
mm,
People began to lose interest a bit. It was a bit faddish to a large extent. There were these agreements, Kyoto, then Paris, and this and that, and people said, well, we're taking steps, we're doing everything we can. And there was a shift, I think, in the studies of climate change from we can't stop climate change, it's inexorable. Let's learn to live with it. So there were a lot more resources diverted to how to survive with climate change, how to cope with it, how to plan ahead, which is, I think, the right emphasis. I
mm,
mean, just have to accept some things and live with them, you know. And so her kind of protestations and grandstanding and became a bit comic, and people began to kind of be disenchanted with her.
mhm,
And then she discovered Palestine and reemerged. And tomorrow she'll find something else. This woman, until the day she dies at age 85, I hope for her, would be committed to these are serial activists, like they're serial monogamists and serial
mm,
killers. These are serial activists.
mm,
And the victim changes, exactly like serial killing, the victim changes from each
mm,
incident to another. I am not
mm,
impressed by any of this. And all these ostentatious displays in at the universities in the United States, Columbia, and this and that. I was watching this. It's cringeworthy, simply cringeworthy.
mm,
These people, and the test is very simple. Do you know what you're talking about? That's the test.
mhm,
Narcissists have what we call in psychology headline knowledge. It's a clinical term. Headline knowledge means you're superficial. You browse a few articles and so on, you consider yourself a world-leading expert. That's the narcissist way. Narcissist is a self-declared expert on everything and everyone under the sun just because he has been exposed to a 5-minute TikTok clip or video on YouTube.
mm,
That makes him an expert.
mm,
So the test, if you want to ask yourself, is this a narcissist who is adopting the victimhood mantle in order to garner narcissistic supply, or is it someone who is truly committed to the cause? Ask yourself how much they know.
mm,
And so a Palestinian from Gaza who would make the same proclamations and promulgations as Greta is probably a true activist, probably motivated by real personal loss and an intimate knowledge of
mm,
what is happening. Greta is not.
mm,
She's headline knowledge. A climate change scientist may have valid and cogent arguments about climate science because he spent 20, 30 years studying the topic. Greta didn't. She was 18 when she started.
mm.
This headline knowledge is a key feature which distinguishes narcissists from, you know,
And Sam, do you think that's I for the first time I'm sort of feel like I'm connecting a dot here, which is it seems like we're seeing more displays of narcissism in the culture, and over a period where social media has become, you know, pervasive. And so has social media, in your view, created that feeling among people that they understand issues better than they do, and that's then contributed to this exaggerated certainty, dogmatism, and intolerance and narcissism.
There is malignant intolerance. I call it malignant tolerance. I'm sorry. Malignant tolerance is uh, using coercion to force you to be tolerant, even of things which, in principle, should never ever be tolerated. So this is malignant tolerance. And another phrase I coined is malignant egalitarianism. If you have access to Wikipedia, you're as much as an expert as anyone, as much as a scholar as anyone, as much of a scholar as anyone. So if you have access to Wikipedia, you're a historian, you're a medical doctor, you're a physicist, or you're an expert on narcissism, like, most YouTubers. So yes, there is this sense that technology not only empowers, but has the transformative value of what Jung may have called collective consciousness, not collective unconscious, but collective consciousness. It's as if the repository of human knowledge being accessible to each and every individual, it renders them equal to someone who has bothered to peruse the repository. In other words, the emphasis is shifted from intimacy to access. Whereas in the past, I would ask you how intimate you are with the topic. Today, I would ask you, do you have access to information about the topic?
Mm.
So not the same things. They're not tantamount. There's no equality here. And yet it gives rise to this hubris and grandiosity that, I'm as good as the next Wikipedia article or as good as the next browser surfing. So yes, social media contributed to the leveling of a playing field that should have never been level
Mm.
because expertise is hierarchical. Knowledge is hierarchical and non-democratic. This tendency to democratize everything is really, really bad,
Mm.
is really self-destructive as far as the species goes, in my view. And it's both right and left. These self-styled experts are equally represented on the right as they are on the left. And but I think another contributing factor is what we call in psychology conspiracism. Conspiracism is a trait. It's a tendency to spot conspiracies or alleged conspiracies everywhere as an organizing principle of life. Not that you say, okay, everything is normal, regular, everything is trustworthy, but there's this niche where probably there's a conspiracy, like in the CIA maybe. But you say, no, conspiracy explains the world. Conspiracy organizes reality. I can make sense of everything only via conspiracies and by assuming conspiracy. So this is called conspiracism.
Mm.
Conspiracism is spread dramatically because of rising uncertainty. And so when I say uncertainty, I don't just mean economic uncertainty. For example, the abolition of gender roles created enormous uncertainty.
Mm.
When uncertainty rises, so does conspiracism.
Mm.
And so when you assume that there are conspiracies everywhere, then there is no objective knowledge because you suspect the scientists of falsifying knowledge.
Mm.
Because they're, I don't know, being paid. They're shields for someone. They're falsifying data. They are, so there's suspicion about that. In other words, conspiracism undermines authority. And perhaps first and foremost, intellectual authority.
Mm.
You cannot be a conspiracist and accept authority. So we say that conspiracism is contumacious. It's underneath it all, there is a rejection of authority because there is a distrust of authority. And there's a distrust of authority because of rising uncertainty. It's a bit of an infantile reaction. You expected your mother and father to provide you with safety and a secure base and determinacy, and they failed. So now you reject them as authority figures. I don't trust you anymore. I don't believe you anymore. It's a toddler temper tantrum. Yeah. And when you couple conspiracism with malignant egalitarianism, you get today's picture.
Mm.
Because if I were to come to you and give you a fact, you need to believe in my authority. you, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't double check the fact, that you shouldn't ask for a second opinion, that you shouldn't do your own research. That is not what I mean. Of course, I don't mean that you should have a logical fallacy from authority. But what I mean is you need to assume that I'm providing you with information that has been vetted by me with the best intentions. I'm not trying to mislead you. I don't have a hidden agenda, ulterior motives. I'm not goal-oriented and so on. That's not the case today. No one believes it about anyone. So you couple conspiracism with malignant egalitarianism, and people say, since no authorities exist, no unbiased authorities, no unprejudiced authorities, not real authorities, says, no, I will be my own authority. And I'm perfectly capable of being my own authority because I have Wikipedia. And that's where we are today.
Mm.
The post-truth society. Yeah? I'll tell you a story. It's a real story. I went online on a forum, and a guy said the Battle of Hastings was in 1066. Another guy said, no, it was 1089. And the first guy posted an excerpt from the Britannica. And the second guy said, well, that's your opinion, maybe the Britannica's opinion. My opinion is that it was in 1089. He didn't even present it as a fact. He said, it's just my opinion. It is a validity of a fact. You know.
Yeah, it's also though that we just come out of a period where we've had a real destruction, self-destruction of elite credibility. COVID laboratory leak, the COVID vaccines didn't prevent infection or transmission. The Hunter Biden laptop had nothing to do with the Russians. There's no
Yeah,
evidence
well,
that
I would argue with some of the facts you presented, but I agree with you that the COVID pandemic has been a period of great questioning of the wisdom, at least, of the authorities, if not the knowledge, but at least the wisdom. And of course, it exposed the inner mechanism of science, which is about falsifying, about lack of certainty. Science is not about finding the truth. Science is about finding the falsities, the wrong things. Science is concerned mainly with finding what are the wrong answers so that we can eliminate them, weed them out. So suddenly people saw that the process of science is constantly evolving based on doubt and that there are no answers, there are only questions. So initially they said, masks are not needed. They're totally useless. And then they said, no, masks are the solution. And then they said, okay, you know what? Masks may be the solution, but only for certain age groups and vulnerable people. And people said to themselves, these guys don't know what they're talking about. But what people didn't understand, laymen, is that this is exactly how science works. Exactly how science works. The more knowledge accumulates, the more we change our answers. Science is protean, is ever changing. It can't give you an answer. Science is about asking the right questions and eliminating the false answers. That's the main. And so applying science to the COVID situation was a catastrophic mistake. It was the wrong discipline. You should never use science to regulate social relations, to regulate social functioning, to establish a lifestyle. These are not the roles of science. It's ill-equipped to do all this. And we did. We made scientists the emperors. They dictated to us. And because they were accumulating data, and the data kept changing, and the answers kept changing, people lost trust in science completely. But it started long before. What did science give us? What? Nuclear weapons. It's science, and not only science. All the ideologies, all the institutions, science among them, failed us. Failed us. We have spent the past 400 years since the Enlightenment, I would say we have spent the past 600 years since the Renaissance started. Renaissance and then Enlightenment and so on. We've spent the past few centuries experimenting. Erickson calls it moratorium period. Moratorium period in Erik Erickson's theory of human development. The moratorium period is when you experiment with different identities. The adolescent, for example, experiments with different sexual identities. It's called moratorium. So we had a moratorium period. The species had a moratorium period. We were adolescent. We are adolescent species. We're very young. And so we experimented. We experimented with liberalism, with democracy, with socialism, with Nazism, with communism, with every ism imaginable. We experimented with science and alchemy and witchcraft and astrology and physics. We experimented. And the end result was that everything we've ever tried failed miserably. We failed as a species. That was the more common experience. Successes were few and far between and usually transient. In the long run and on the big questions, we failed catastrophically. Catastrophically. And so people lost trust. Because who came up with these experiments? The intellectuals, the scientists, the elites. And they all failed. They all failed us. So people said, the hell with that. I'm going to be my own shepherd. I don't trust anyone anymore.
Sam, there's been a lot of talk about rising anxiety. You have a few more
Michael, I have
minutes?
to I have to apologize to you, but I thought it would be 90 minutes. I fixed dinner and I
Oh,
have to
please.
run. But I would love to continue this conversation with you if you have additional questions. So I'm
That
at your
sounds great.
disposal, but I'm at your disposal only tomorrow because after that I'm gone for 10 days. And then I have
Okay.
a seminar and then I have a documentary with a German television. So
I would love
the only
that.
time I'm available is tomorrow if you want to continue.
That sounds great. What time works? Same time?
Same. So let's
Same
make it 3
time?
o'clock if you can.
Okay, sure.
Can you make it 3 o'clock? Because then
Yeah,
I have a lot more time.
that sounds great.
Right now it's six something here, so I have family obligations and so on. I have to go to dinner.
That
Okay.
sounds great. Thanks, Sam.
Okay. So I'll await your Zoom invitation.
Yeah, for 3 p.m. CET.
It's 3 p.m. CT for tomorrow. I'll
Sounds
make
great.
myself available, and then we can have like 3 hours even. No limit.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks,
Okay.
Sam.
Apologies.
Take care.
Don't forget your question, the one you wanted to ask. Take care.
There's many more. All right, take care.
Okay. Bye.